You're listening to the Physio Matters Podcast in association with Choose Health, and this is session 19. Welcome back to the Physio Matters Podcast with me, Jack Chew. Huge thanks as ever to those promoting our last broadcast with Ian Griffiths, which broke all our records for social media interaction. So thanks, of course, again to Ian and to the episode sponsor, Firefly Orthoses. Last month, I had the pleasure of attending a course by two of the most opinionated men in the game, Greg Lehman and Adam Meekins. We actually recorded this interview in Adam's office, which is, unsurprisingly, a treasure chest of dry needling recipe books and Reiki crystals. So many thanks to Greg and Adam for hosting the chat and for, of course, the course. Session 19's interview is with running specialists Matt Phillips and Tom Goom, both from sunny Brighton, and we chat about a few key features of managing runners. I'm on record declaring that podcasts should be around the hour duration, but once again, we've too much to cut down, so I'll shut up soon. An extra little bit of content will be out on our YouTube channel discussing interprofessional turf wars with Tom and Matt, so definitely keep an eye out for that. But first, I hope you enjoy the interview. Hi gents, would you like to introduce yourself?
Okay, so my name is Matt Phillips, Twitter handle Sport Injury Matt, for those of you who follow me on Twitter. And I'm a sports therapist, strength and conditioning coach down in Brighton, looking not just after runners, but predominantly runners.
I'm Tom Goom. I'm also a runner, similar to Matt, and a physio. And I have my website, Running Physio, which has got me the moniker, The Running Physio.
Brilliant. So first I'd like to just talk a little bit about your typical working weeks. So starting with you, Tom, what is it you get up to clinically?
See an awful lot of runners and sports people in general in clinic, but it's not just solely that. We also see pretty much everything really, same as other physios. I try and do as much sort of practical stuff, so I try and get trackside as often as I can, do a bit of work with Lewis Athletic. But I've also divided my week up, so I've got set hours each week for doing a bit of research, a bit of web work, and just trying to squeeze all the different things in, really.
And that's all in private practice, is it, at the moment?
All in private practice in the Physio Rooms Clinic in Brighton.
Brilliant, lovely. And you, Matt?
Yeah, similar to Tom, probably maybe a little bit more time spent in clinic, seeing runners come in and, like I say, non-runners. But also I'm a running coach, so I'm looking after runners remotely with plans, getting involved with going out with some coaching and training with them. Sometimes making it up to the track as well. I work with James Dunn sometimes, who people have probably heard of. We do some track work at Withdean Stadium. So yeah, a little bit of everything.
So not just injured stuff, some performance work with asymptomatic athletes?
Yeah, definitely the trend in my career has been to try and not just wait for the runners to come through the door when they are injured. I try and get the message out there that come and see me before that, so we can look at some preventative work. You know, I think we've got far much, and Tom may well agree with this later on, but we've got many more tools we can use to try and reduce the risk of injury and help you before you come in, you know, limping and trying to get us to fix you somehow. Okay,
brilliant. And I suppose that ties us into, tell me about your typical non-working week then, because you both mentioned that you're both runners and that comes with the trend. I think that's important from both of you professionally as well. So what does that involve? What's your mileage both now and historically?
Well, mine's a bit on the low side at the minute because of Woody making an arrival. Usually I try and run once or twice a week if I'm not competing, and then between 3 and 5 times a week if I am competing. I think it's quite useful if you are a physio and you're treating runners or really any sport, to try and be involved in the sport, because it teaches you a lot more about it. I think really for me, doing the marathon taught me more about running than, you know, any paper you can read or anything else like that. But away from running and physio stuff, I'm a bit of an old man. I like my wine and my whiskey and my real ale, and like a bit of a box set. So I do have time when I'm not a physio, because I think people think I'm just buried in papers all the time.
Yeah, but you do. I mean, it's worth mentioning. You briefly mentioned your blog and stuff. That's not particularly old manish, fairly contemporary with the old social media and your famous blog.
Yeah, I try and stay up to date with that kind of thing, and yeah, I think that side of things good, but yeah, it can't be a bit of pipe and slippers at the end of the day.
That sounds fair enough, and a newborn as well. Both of you new dads, so tell me, Matt, what's yours compare? What's your non-working week?
Well, obviously I'm about 30 years older than Tom, so my days of competing are pretty much non-existent now. I'm still very much out running, but normally with other runners and matching that's why I need to look after kind of recreational runners so I can keep up with them these days. But no, still try, definitely, I think it's very important not only to go out running, but now and again, like I've recently had a little bit of a calf issue where I went out to a park run after 3 hours of sleep, after changing a nappy and not warming up, and hey, surprise, surprise, I injured myself. But that's actually been quite a good couple of weeks because I've actually had to put myself through my own rehab. So I've been checking out how realistic some of the expectations I have of other runners is, if I'm telling them to do this and that and foam roll and blah, blah, blah. So I think it's useful sometimes to actually injure yourself in the sport that you're preaching as well. So you keep up to date with how real your expectations are of others.
No, absolutely. And do you particularly specifically look at your own mileage to both of you really? Is that something you both do? Practice what you preach as much as possible?
Yeah, I keep an eye on it. More so during competing times, but yeah, because I know from previous experience, again, like Matt said, with injuries myself, that there's aspects of it that if you don't keep an eye on it, they can build up without you realising. When I had my hamstring injury, my mileage was the same, but what had happened is my hill work had gone up a lot. So when I looked at the data from a GPS, the elevation stats were completely different. So I'd suddenly done a lot more hill running, a lot more elevation work, and that's what irritated the hamstring. But really, if you can keep an eye on those things, you can stop it happening. I think, like Matt says, that's where prevention comes in.
Yeah, do you analyse similarly?
Definitely. And you were wearing a rucksack as well, weren't you? If I remember right.
Oh, a bit of everything. Yeah, as many mistakes as once of it.
Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah. I mean, especially as I'm getting older, and I've always been very much on top, coming from not purely a running background, but I used to be very much at home in the gym and strength training, and I think sometimes that's been an advantage to me in helping runners because I've always been very out with a notebook, writing down what you did next week or last week, comparing to what you can do now, and I think that's what I try and get a lot of runners to do, to get as kind of methodical as a weight trainer does, or whether it's just for vanity or actual strength gains like they do in the gym. That's what runners need to do themselves, not only for their level of running and how often they're going out, but also for their strength training, to see the development. And because if they're not forcing their body enough to make an adaptation, then they're not going to get stronger. And I think a lot of them don't keep enough notes on what they're doing during the week.
Brilliant, lovely. I'm sure we'll come to that sort of monitoring thing later on in the chat. But despite being from different professions and from different clinical backgrounds, having chatted to you both off the microphone and also having read and looked at a lot of your work on the internet that you both share kindly, I see that you seem to have fairly similar approaches to assessment, treatment, management of runners. Why do you think that is, despite that difference initially?
I think some of it is actually around common sense, I think, in the sense that with runners we know that too much too soon is going to be likely to be a cause of many injuries, isn't it? We know that overload and training error causes a lot of them. So I think both of us have looked into that and have looked at how we might prevent that from happening by looking at training characteristics and stuff as well. But I also think from reading some of Matt's work, like Matt knows his pain science and knows the bigger picture as well. I think we both share quite similar views because we come from sort of similar directions, I guess, from that. But also, if you read the key papers, things like Scott Dye's work, that really sort of shows us where the link between load and frequency and injury starts to happen. A lot of us will read those key papers and come to a similar place in terms of our approach, I think.
Definitely. I mean, in my case, it's been very much, testimony to Tom as well. I remember reading his stuff as soon as he started, putting the information out there. But I'm very much, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later on, most of the way I've modified my way of thinking has been thanks to peers and people I've worked with rather than the initial training I did. It's just about keeping up to date, and that's the beauty of social media these days, of keeping up to date with what other people are saying, seeing often the polarised debates, which is great because that's the way you see the extremes. And then, like Tom says, if you've got a bit of common sense, and most of the time you end up taking the middle path, and you learn a lot that way.
I think that it's modest of both of you when you're saying using the term common sense, because if it was that common, we'd all be out of work, wouldn't we? So sometimes we feel like we're professing that, but you're clearly both well read and have a passion for these things. So what is it that drew you towards running more particularly?
Yeah, so originally I wasn't a runner. Originally, it was for martial arts, and I used running as a way to keep fit for martial arts. And then eventually I got kind of tired of either hitting other people or getting hit myself, and just moved into the running as sort of less injuries in theory anyway. And then because I was running more myself, and obviously I started hanging out with more runners and mixing with runners, and then found that I had more ways I could help them, especially coming from a strength and conditioning background, because a lot of runners, that's where predominantly I'd come from. I was always, doing a lot of weight work to try and keep my weight up so I could fight at higher weights. And suddenly I surrounded myself with these little skinny runners, no offence, Tom, but little skinny runners who were struggling with injuries. And I was like, well, are you doing any strength training? And, how do you expect to be able to meet the demands of hopping from one leg to the other kind of 1,600 times a mile if you're not doing any strength training and with heavy weights? So
that's where the common sense thing felt like it came into you, it just made sense,
yeah.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
I came into it, as I said, from running my first marathon a few years ago and discovering there wasn't much out there on managing running injuries. But my background is actually chronic pain. So prior to this, I used to run a chronic pain service. There's a functional restoration program in Brighton. And what I found, what really interested me with the runners, is a lot of the key principles are actually really similar. So they definitely needed some education, some understanding that they weren't actually damaging their bodies, that they were just perhaps working a bit too hard. They needed pacing, which is a key thing we do in chronic pain, isn't it? Helping them to see that the right level of activity is really helpful for them, and if they overdo it, things are going to get a bit sensitive and sore. And really trying that overlap between some of those key ideas from chronic pain and into running, I found really interesting. And then I was kind of wondering, well, we talk about things like a graded return, we talk about pacing. What does that mean? Like, to a runner, how do we actually put some figures on that? How do we actually quantify that a bit? Because my graded return to running may be very different from a runner's perception of return to running. So that's where I, got my geek on a bit and buried my head in the research and looked to see if there's evidence out there to give us a bit of guidance. And I've, again, found that quite fascinating, because that advice then, the more I read, the more I was able to say, well, actually, look, if you do a bit of this and a bit of this and you modify this a bit, we can keep you running, we can keep you doing what you love, but we can bring it down to a level that you can cope with.
And that evidence interpretation is something that, when scrutinised and when reflected on, lands you in similar places. Would you agree with that, Matt? Is that why I was saying before with my original question, why there might be such similarities, is because that's where the evidence takes you?
It does seem that way, but I don't know, you never know, because obviously you tend to mix and talk with people who are saying things you like. I don't know how guilty we all are of cherry picking, but I found so many people who I kind of like what they're saying, and they're all kind of saying the same sort of thing, so it kind of makes sense. And I put in my own personal experience, I see if I start using their principles with people I'm working with and they're getting successes, and I see where there's not successes, and that's being explained as well by the evidence I'm reading, that the idea that you must never expect everything to work, and so it all kind of fits into place. But I think what Tom was saying about the similarities, taking from a chronic pain science and things like that and putting it in with runners, I think that's one of the fascinating things about runners, because runners do stand out as these creatures who think that they can run every day of the week, every week of the year, and get away with it without the needs for kind of seasons or preparing themselves like any other sport. And the other thing is, running is really, people, if people go out and run, before long, they've been done it for a month, they've done the first 5k, and they'll call themselves a runner, and they'll go, what do you do? I'm a runner. You don't really get many people who play five-a-side once a week going, I'm a footballer, or I'm a rugby player. So there's an awful lot of the psychosocial kind of side behind running, and when someone becomes injured, I think that's when we see some of the similar kind of pain modifications, and kind of the culture of that person really is almost like mourning the fact that they can't go out and run anymore. And without that, they've lost a lot of their symbol and their status in society and what they stand for. And so if we're going to help them, it really drums home a lot of what pain science is telling us about, not just looking at the injury, but looking at the implications of them not being able to run every day.
Just, to add to what Matt's saying there, totally agree. And it's something we see when you have experienced a lot working with lots of runners, is that you do really miss it if you can't do it. It is harder to rest than to run sometimes for these people. And sometimes we want to actually explore with that runner why, because quite a few I'm finding of just chatting to runners, and this isn't based on any research or anything, but they'll often run to manage mental health conditions or to manage their stress, or it becomes a really big important part of their life. Whereas Matt says, it's the social side of it. It's not just about going out there and plodding the streets. It's about the friends that they meet up with and everything else that goes with it. So once they're removed from that because of an injury, it's a really, really big thing. So we want to try and provide support for that side of things as well. And I think that's part of the reason why, if we can, we want to keep them running, keep them involved in all that side of stuff so that they haven't just lost a huge chunk of their life.
No, brilliant. Now, I think that the similarities in the same page thinking that we're going to agree on, it's not necessarily that widespread. Otherwise, I wouldn't have you two in this room. I could have picked any number of people. So there are an awful lot of things within running that aren't quite as evidence-informed and holistic. Why do you think that is? I know we're not going to pick on anything in particular, but I don't know but feel free to disagree with it as well. But it seems like it is an area in which some almost quackery can flourish.
I think it's a really tricky one, because you often have a big disparity between commonly held ideas in running and what the evidence says. And a good example of that is stretching. We've stretched for years, and then suddenly a load of papers come out that say that it might actually have some negative effects. And it's difficult sometimes to bridge that gap, going back to some of those coaches and athletes that have stretched for years and years and saying, well, our research says that this might not be that useful. And they might think, well, I find it useful. I find it helps me. And then it's a difficult balance then to say, well, do our studies in maybe more of a lab-based environment, very sort of sterile and scientific, do they tell us enough about this individual person for us to be able to say, well, I don't know, you should stop stretching because the studies say you should stop stretching?
It's a bit blunt.
I think so. I think that's where there's these gaps, and nearly all the kind of adjunctive treatments that sit around running, things like your taping, I know you discussed before, your foam rollering, your static stretching, your yoga, everything, all the things that sort of sit around it. Historically, they don't have a great evidence base, but anecdotally, runners find them really helpful. And I think that, again, it's that gap between the research and what the runners are telling us. And I think it's difficult sometimes for us to know where to sit with that. Do we say, well, we've read the research, so we know best? Or do we say, well, you've been running 20 years, you know your body, you know best? I think it's a difficult one.
For sure. And I think we'll probably come to unpicking as to top tips for how to get past that maybe or work with that. What do you reckon to it, Matt?
I think the advantage we've got is, depending on your sources, we can still say that between 30% and some sources will say up to like 70-80% of runners are injured every year. So using those sort of stats, you can always say to somebody, well, look, something's going wrong. And the fact we've got a business and the runners are coming in and they're repeatedly getting the same sort of mistakes and errors and means something's got to change. So when my bias is against stretching, and I recognise that. And I'm probably far too militant on it, but I truly believe that if runners put as much effort into strength work as they did into stretching, and therapists as well, if therapists learned ways of giving runners, strength training instead of just, I've got a new stretch for you, or try and stretch this, then, we could turn things around quite heavily. And anecdotally, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but the other day I was reading a very well-known international running magazine. And it's
very BBC of you, Matt. not wanting to name drop. Go on.
It's not the one. It's not Running Fitness that I write for. Obviously, it was a different one. I just dropped in, but and it was. I had to look at it twice because it was like strength exercise of the week. I thought, oh, excellent! They've got strength exercise of the week. That's nice. Don't normally see that. And then I looked. It was the seated hamstring stretch. I thought, it's just been a misprint, editor problem. I thought, and it was a strength exercise of the week was sit down, touch your toes, see how these strength gains help your running stride and reduce injury. And I almost spat my tea out on purpose over the article because, what made me think when you asked this question originally was, okay, so Tom, myself, and a lot of other therapists, because it's not just us two, maybe not enough, but we're maybe putting out this message when people come to see us. But the power that the media's got, the magazines and the online DVDs and the videos, they need something to sell every week and something to market, and it's far easier marketing these kind of myths. And I think that's the main struggle. And slowly, if we manage to change the media, and through the help of Tom writing for magazines and his blog, and I think especially the magazines and online, trying to rival a little bit the big branded magazines to get the message out there, that's a real powerful tool. And podcasts like this, if they reach out to the general public as well, then.
For sure, yeah, and that's something that we need to probably look at is how, we disseminate this information to clinicians and then they take it to patients. How can we take it and start making some more public-centred podcasts?
I suppose it's about trying to perhaps help people see what is the stuff that's really most likely to help them. Because one of the questions I've had on a presentation to a group of runners before is this: well, I've read all the magazines, and according to the magazines, I should stretch and foam roll and eat beetroot. That apparently is a big thing at the minute. Nice. And yoga and Pilates and strength work and training and X, Y, and Z. But how do I do all that? Because I've also got to work and raise a family and do everything else.
Run.
Yeah, sweet. So what if I've got limited time? What are the key things I should be doing? And I totally agree with what Matt's saying. Well, the key things you should be doing are strength work, because the evidence is there to support it in terms of improving performance and in terms of reducing injury risk, and structuring your training program well. And those are probably the thing to invest your time and your money and your effort in. And if you like a bit of yoga, or you find your static stretches make you feel a bit better, or you want to try a bit of foam rolling and that helps you, by all means add that, but know that it's probably not going to be the key thing. It might be something you can choose to add on if you particularly want to.
I find that really interesting, where patients will say, how am I meant to find the time for all these things that are being suggested? They've got the time to read them, haven't they? So they're clearly craving education to some extent. That's an interesting feature for runners, isn't it, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes the aversion to... I don't get many patients complaining about finding time to stretch because they find it quite relaxing. I think normally the aversion is, how am I supposed to find time to do these strength exercises? And maybe that's a miscommunication that they really need to be doing. You don't have to do, all you got to do with strength exercise is take the body to failure, so you're causing a load that the tissues are going to adapt, and bingo, you're done. You don't even necessarily have to do, in my opinion, 3 sets or something, as long as kind of you just make an effort onto the tissues so they adjust and you get stronger. Fantastic. And it hasn't got to take much more than 12 repetitions, maybe a couple of sets, maybe every other day or something, depending on the needs. So that, I think it's just a question of education, and can be done in a fun way. It hasn't got to be boring. You haven't got to do it in the gym. You haven't got to feel self-conscious. You can just get yourself a kettlebell or a dumbbell or something, or even I had the other day a client who's doing their exercises holding buckets of water, which I thought was brilliant. She's actually measuring it. She's actually progressing it, because I said it's important to keep trying to push more, so she's putting an extra cup of water in each time to see herself getting more reps out.
That's brilliant. I like that.
Which was amazing, wasn't it? I've patented it, by the way, you can't use that.
My favourite one I had with a patient in terms of progressing his exercises is he was getting fatter, and he said, well, basically I'm putting on weight, so for my calf raises and things I'm getting fatter every week, so that's how So I thought it was pretty good. I think you kind of missed the point a bit there. But I totally agree. I mean, if we can get the strength stuff in there, definitely, it's so beneficial. But also, again, thinking in a little bit more detail about these things is, what are the barriers to that? And we know from studies in the 90s, as much as 65% of people don't do their exercises as instructed. I know from my courses, I routinely ask people who has had an injury, and the vast majority of people, physios and sports therapists, say, yeah, I've had an injury. And I say, who's rehabbed it? Who's done all the rehab they should have done? And so far, one person in all the courses has actually done all their rehab. And these are people that know exactly what to do. They're physios and sports therapists who know exactly what to do, but they're not doing it. So it's that gap between knowing what to do and actually putting it into practice. Yeah. And again, I think that's another challenging thing for our role is, how do we help them overcome those barriers? Is it, as Matt says, like, get whatever you've got at home. Don't get too fussed about being really specific about reps and sets. As you say, maybe aim for fatigue. Perhaps that's a better aim, and use a kit that you've got and get it done however you can get it done, I guess. As opposed to being a bit snooty about it and really, you must do it this
making
way,
it particular.
You might put people off. I don't know, everyone's different, I guess.
Absolutely. No, that makes sense. Now, when it comes to assessment, I'm going to preempt that you're both going to say something along the lines of the subjective is key, and as most guests do. But what are your most valued questions, and what specific questions might you use when assessing runners that other listeners that have a more varied caseload might not necessarily use as a go-to question?
The first thing I tend to like to ask is for the patient to give me literally a day-by-day breakdown of what sport they're doing. So literally each day of the week, what are you doing, how far are you going, if you're running, how many miles, what kind of intensity, what sort of session is it. So I've really got a good idea of what their loading habits are. So getting that kind of microcycle nailed. And then also looking at how things have developed over the last few months and leading up to the injury. So what's changed in that? So we can see, has there been overload from an increase in volume, an increase in intensity, an increase in frequency, that type of thing. So looking at the micro cycle and more of the sort of meso and macro cycles, the bigger periods of time to see how things changed. And then also linked to that, I think really important questions to ask is there a distance you can run without pain? To see, is there an amount of running you can keep them doing? And if they are getting pain, what level is it at? Is it a little niggle? And then seeing how the tissues then react in the next sort of 24 to 48 hours. So not just during activity, but after activity, because again, that tells us about how much they're going to tolerate in terms of their loading.
Oh, brilliant. Anything to add on that then, Matt?
I'd just like to say ditto. Yeah. It's and the interesting thing is, straight away, and this is what I think needs to be taught more maybe on courses, ones that I've seen anyway, is we haven't even mentioned yet looking for an injury. We haven't even mentioned yet lying someone down and seeing their range of movement or that sort of stuff. We're just getting an idea of what they've been doing, and not only listening to their load, but also listening to the language they use when they talk about it. You know, because as we know in this room, and maybe the message isn't out there, that it's not just the information they're giving, it's the words they use, the metaphors, so you're getting an idea of kind of the psychosocial side of things. And I think this is something which, I don't know, as far as I know, still isn't being taught enough during the assessment. Most traditional assessments on courses, at least in sports therapy, are still straight, right? Are your hips level, are your shoulders level? You know, there's a quick listen to the patient or the client or the runner about what they've been doing, but inside you're looking at them and thinking, oh, look how he's sitting, look at his pelvis, look at the inward rotation, and you're already trying to look at potential biomechanical reasons for this injury. And if your brain's going like that, you're not listening to them, you're not listening to the load they're doing, you're not listening to the obvious, you're trying to look for some structuralist reason for this injury, which they might not even have. It could just be pain related and might not even have an injury.
You've mentioned a lot of listening there. Is there any particular questions that you'd use to elicit those opinions?
One of my favourite questions, which I always enjoy saying, which means I must quite enjoy it, is what do you think you've done to yourself? You know, and that gives me a chance then to sit back, and it answers all those questions, because they'll come back and the words they use and everything gives me an idea of how worried they are, gives me an idea of any preconceived conceptions, which is going to potentially make any rehab I give them, any recovery, you know, a little bit more, any barriers that are put up. And 9 times out of 10, I get some really good replies from that question. It really helps, especially if they've seen other therapists who maybe aren't singing from the same hymn book as me and Tom. You know, and it really helps to give an idea of, right, what am I going to do with this person as opposed to what am I going to do with this injury.
Okay, yeah, nice. Yeah. And then you see that as a priority?
Oh, huge. Yeah, massive.
And Tom, nodding along there?
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I think you know, Matt's hit the nail on the head there, really. Listening to the exact words they use to describe an injury can be really good, and getting their perception of what's causing the problem. And we know from a bit of evidence as well, things like Claire Ardern's work, that psychosocial factors will actually, you know, significantly prevent return to sport. Most of the work's been done around ACL reconstruction, but if we can foster a positive attitude towards return to sport and remove the fear, then there's much more likely they'll go back to it. And part of that is exactly as Matt says, looking for those words, those key words like, oh, you know, I'm wearing my knees down, I'm damaging my joint, and challenging some of those and helping them see that actually that's not the case. Because I think that's just as important as anything we might do biomechanically.
Brilliant. And seeing that education has been fundamental to showing that returning to the same level of running is inevitable rather than potential. Yeah. And that's great stuff. Now, onto your objective stuff, although, of course, it'll depend on your subjective findings. What would you say your go-to assessment strategies are? I know you both like the treadmill assessments, for example.
Yeah, I think, again, this kind of links in with the way that we conduct our subjective assessment as well, because if you go straight into the typical lie down on the couch, look at range of movement, and we know now that how someone reacts when they're in a static environment in terms of range of movement, it's not, research has shown quite clearly that it's not necessarily going to reflect what they do when they're doing their task. And we know this with some research. Is it Shake, the Thomas test one? I mean, that's a commonly quoted one where you can lie someone down. It looks like they've got limited hip extension flexibility or something, and yet when you see them running, the hips are falling forwards, and if anything, they've got no limitation at all. So I think the important thing is there is value in what you see when they're on the couch, especially if they're in a lot of pain. But as soon as you can, you've got to see them performing as close to possible the task which is causing them that pain and that problem. So ultimately for us, it means if a runner comes in with a running pain or injury, we need to see them running. Or at least we need to get them standing up on one leg and doing assessments that involve some form of balance need, so we can really stimulate that sensory feedback which is related to the pain which is being caused when they're running.
Yeah, get the feet on the ground at the very least.
Exactly, yeah.
Brilliant. How about you then, Tom?
Yeah, I agree. I think all these things are all different little pieces of the puzzle, really. I think it's important to try and look at what I think all the big three, so strength, flexibility and movement control, and what you choose to look at in each of those categories will be quite different depending on the person in front of you, what kind of injury they've had, and the things that we've talked about in subjective history. So perhaps we would look at things like single leg stand, single leg squat or single knee dip. I find them quite useful just to give you a rough idea of basic movement control. As Matt says, they may not translate over into a running technique, but they will tell you a bit about control around the hip and the knee. They'll tell you a bit about range of movement at the ankle. Simple tests like that give you quite a lot of useful information. In terms of my strength tests, I use a variety of different ones. So I do use isometrics, but I find them of limited usefulness for the bigger muscle groups, because I find often you won't pick up a weakness there. If you're trying to get, in a runner, you're probably not going to find a quads or hamstring weakness very often with isometrics. So I would then look at other things like work capacity tests. So I might get them doing repeated single leg bridges to fatigue, repeated calf raises to fatigue, repeated squats to fatigue, to see if we can find a difference left and right that links to their symptoms. And I might even take that up a level and do things like 10 rep max testing. So I like things like single leg press, a bit of work from Lee Harrington's group suggesting we should be aiming for 1.5 times, maybe even 2 times body weight as a 10 rep max for your single leg press. So it gives you some markers that you can work towards and some indication about how this runner might manage load. And also gives us direction for our strength and conditioning, because if we're pinpointing areas where there is a bit of a weakness, then we can target that, and it's going to be more effective than a kind of carpet bombing approach of just trying a bit of everything.
Absolutely. Now, if I may, off the back of those things, shall we go to then the treadmill? I know that both of you are happy to and do assess on the treadmill. Now, what does that typically entail for you guys? Is it a proper goldfish bowl where every angle is scrutinised, or is it a bit broader than that?
I think again it varies from individuals and the environment that you've got available to you. I do treadmill assessment, but I do also quite like getting down the track if that's where they do a lot of their work, getting them outside if possible. So like any assessment, we vary it, don't we, to the individual. Personally, I try to be quite systematic because it's quite easy to get focused in on one area. Historically, we see things like the shoe shot gait assessments where they just look at your feet, that type of thing. So I try and look from the front, from the back and from the side. I start with just a top to toe look at kinematics, so looking at angular changes, and literally start at the head, down to the shoulders, down to the hips, down to the knees, and look to see if there's anything obvious that leaps out, and look at it from all 3 angles, ideally front, back and side, and throughout the gait cycle. So again, we can get focused in on just foot strike, or just mid stance. It's good to look at the whole thing. Then once I've done that, I would then focus on specific areas when I feel like I've got a good overview. So that's when I would look at things like foot strike and transition, stride length, stride width, and things that we know link to loading and have some evidence behind them, including things like step rate. So that's not everything, but it gives you a nice idea of lots of factors that will interlink, and then you can use that and compare it with what we know from the research in terms of what you're finding and how it affects the load on the tissue in question.
Do you cast the net that wide with every individual, or are we talking about the fact that all the assessment that came before it makes it a more particular assessment?
I generally would probably do that thorough assessment for each runner for the first time, and I can see why you might want to look at specific things, but I think it's just so easy to get focused on one area, and so many of these things actually interrelate anyway. So when you change one thing, you often end up changing other things. So I found when I was first doing gait assessment, if I got too focused on one thing because I thought it was related to their pain, I didn't see something happening higher up the chain, which actually might be more relevant. So to give you an example, we know from some of the studies that stride width, a narrow stride width, tends to result in more adduction of the hip, more internal rotation, and then more rear foot eversion. So what sometimes people might say, more pronation. So if you just look at those feet and say, oh, well, this person's pronating, even though we probably don't think that's a problem, that's a whole different subject, but if you just look at those feet, you don't look at the fact that it may well be coming from stride width. It may well be coming from hips and X, Y, and Z. So that's my personal take on it. Yeah.
Definitely, without a doubt, expertly said. And even I'll go one level higher, because even before I put them on the treadmill to look at them globally, I want to again kind of know if they've got any preconceived ideas of how they should be running. So one of the important questions I make sure I include before they get on the treadmill is if they're trying to, because a lot of people these days have read something online, and it's useful to know before they get on whether they are consciously trying to, whatever their version of standing upright is or landing on a particular part of the foot, or if they're trying to, a famous one is people trying to get their heels to kind of touch their backsides when they're running, because otherwise you can put someone on there and think, oh, I'm looking at this person running, and you're not. You're looking at this sort of almost a charade of them showing you what they think you want to see. So if you look at that, and then you're trying to evaluate, how could this be? It's difficult enough linking someone's running form with some form of pain anyway, but if you're looking at something they've read out of an international selling running magazine that they think they should be doing, then first things first is, sometimes people say, no, nothing at all, just do what comes naturally, and that's almost like a breath of fresh air. But if they do say, oh no, I have actually been told by one of my boot camp instructors that I should be trying to run more on the front of my toes or something, and that's not a dig against boot camp instructors, it just came to mind. But knowing if there's any preconceived ways of running is important. And then, like Tom says, looking globally, because often, for an example, a lot of lower leg, this is backed by research as well, a lot of lower leg issues do stem proximally from what's happening around the hips and that. So often I find a solution to helping somebody who is suffering from lower leg issues with Achilles or calves or something is addressing what's happening at the pelvis. And you know what, you might not be you might just choose anything that's helping at the pelvis and changing it slightly. You might not actually have picked up on some biomechanical deficiency or anything. It might just be changing the way the body's moving, getting some variety in there, and the knock-on effect is always going to be huge. And a lot of the time that knock-on effect is going to have a positive influence on what's happening down below. Global picture. And then you get into things like, once you've found something, then you get into the whole Gait retraining and trying to find a way that this person is going to, that subtle combination of getting them to think what they're doing whilst they're running but not for too long, and then backing that up with maybe some specific strength training, because again, research is very much a grey area about whether one alone can help or whether either help. So I think that's always the interesting part, is it's mixing the running cues and the strength training they do to try and support it
in a symptom modification manner.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, and I know it's an awkward question really regarding cause and effect, but you're assessing a symptomatic runner, and you're seeing sometimes overt changes. How are you sort of gauging whether they're running like that because it hurts, or they're running like that and it's contributing to said pain?
I think it depends when you choose to do that assessment. If you do an assessment when they're still in pain, then and it's painful as they run, then I agree it probably is going to have quite an influence on how they run. So I think there's a right time probably to look at their running gait, and usually I would try and get them to a stage where they can do pain-free running for the length of the assessment. But even then, you're totally right. Perhaps there is some adaptation because of the pain. It's changed the way they run, and it's difficult to reason through what's come first, I think, and I don't think the research has an answer for that yet. But what we are starting to get some evidence for in some of the research is that if you change it, you can get some good results. So things like the work by Neuron and their team, Rich Willie and his team, looking at changing the way people with patellofemoral pain run, for example, and then seeing that they actually get really quite promising results in terms of reduction of pain. So it's trying to put all those pieces together, I think. Seeing, okay, you have pain in this area, your current running style perhaps puts a little bit more load on it than it's coping with. We want to see if we can change that a little bit to reduce the load, see what happens with these symptoms, and then go from there as part of a big overall management program. As Matt says, it's not ever in isolation, and not all the time. I don't feel we should be saying to people, right, this is how you run now.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
It's variability. It's creating options and giving them a chance to change, and that can be really useful. And giving them the freedom to run,
giving them permission to run differently and variably. Okay. What do you reckon then, Matt? Cause and effect?
Good point. I very rarely. I'll always make sure I don't put too much. I don't read too much out of a gait analysis if someone's running and they're in pain. My first priority would be to take them through a rehab ladder where they can jump multiplanar hops and stuff successfully without too much of the symptoms. and then get them onto a stage where they are, when running becomes rehab, if you like. And that will be, a certain distance up the ladder, and that's when you can start working on potentially how changes to their running form. I think it's important as well, may or may not help the issue. There's only a very few different ways which we can tweak running form. In fact, there's nothing really we can do where we can definitely say that's gonna take this pain away or even help you become a better runner. There's only a few things which you can play around, like Tom's mentioned with stride width, that's been linked in. Cadence is another big thing which I use a lot with runners in trying to reduce overstriding. And a lot of the times the knock-on effects of these happen to help the symptom that the person's come in with.
So you don't buy the minutiae particulars then?
No, not really at all. And sometimes I worry that if runners came in and compared notes, they'd go, "Oh my God, Matt's given me exactly the same thing. What's going on here?" You know what? When you look at the bigger picture, like Tom says, if you are, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have to look at their load, and it's going to stem down to something too soon or too much of an increase or frequency, intensity, whatever. Maybe then there's going to be a lot of recreational runners. They'll come in with a certain running form which you could potentially improve by increasing cadence, reducing overstriding, maybe trying to get rid of a cross over gait if they're going long distance. So a lot of the stuff we do, it's not pinpointing, right, you've come in with a Achilles tendinopathy and therefore I'm going to open this book and this is what we need to do. We need to make you run like this. It's not that at all. It's looking at the big global picture, trying a few things out, and then just looking at the run in front of you and seeing how they react to it.
Totally. There's no one size fits all, as Matt said. It's got to be about the individual. And one little point just to clarify with the assessing them if they have pain. I'm not saying that you can't do the assessment if there's some pain there present, because sometimes you may choose to do that to see if your cues actually change their pain. So it can be useful, but I think it's about finding the right kind of level. You've got a patient hobbling in that can't walk without discomfort, and you're going to get them on the treadmill, you are going to see a very different picture from how they would run normally. So I think it's just reasoning through, perhaps, as Matt says, doing some testing that they can tolerate some load, and then yes, maybe they've got some discomfort, but it's not at that level, that it's going to really affect their running, and you can actually see if your cues change it. So I think you can do it sometimes with some discomfort, but
be cautious,
each person's different. So.
And the tricky ones, of course, as well, is when you get runners who sort of doesn't start hurting until they've done 10 miles. Or if you're with an ultra runner, I've got one guy who quite happily runs for 36 hours and the pain kicks in maybe at 56 miles. So what am I going to do? In sandals. What am I going to do? Send them out, or a triathlete maybe, who needs to go for they're coming in and saying, "Oh, it really hurts, in the run." And ideally you'd want to send them out for a cycle and a swim first of all and then see them. So it's also hitting that point.
Go for it. Get them out for that cycle and swim.
Do you charge them though whilst they're cycling?
Yeah. Go with them. Drive alongside them.
Stand and watch.
No, I've done a fair few gait assessments where someone's done 10-mile run because their symptoms occur at 10 miles, and I said, come and see me at 10 miles, and they come in a bit hot and sweaty, and you get them on the treadmill. And I think, as we said, like any assessment, you can vary it. You're getting an idea of them under fatigue.
Absolutely.
So it might be that you do an analysis with them fresh, and then you get them out doing 10 miles, and you see what changes. Does that then link into their symptoms, and how can we correct? Well, correct may not be the best word, but how can we change that to help them?
When we think about clinical practicalities, how long's your typical gait analysis as part of your assessment? Would you say how long do you have them on the treadmill for?
The whole session I usually book out 45 minutes for mine. Because I find it takes up time to do a full gait assessment. In terms of how long they spend running will depend a bit on things like severity and irritability if they've got symptoms, and also what you find. Sometimes you look at them and you think, do you know what? There's really nothing to change here. It looks good. The pattern doesn't seem to be putting excessive load on things, and we don't want to change this for the sake of it. And in those guys, we might not do much. I might explore it a bit. Look at them over a range of different speeds on different surfaces just to see if we can find anything that links in. But sometimes it might be relatively short, 15-20 minutes of running, and other times you're there and you're thinking, I've only got 2 minutes left and there's still more I want to look at, because you've then got to go on to your cueing and looking at how to change it and reviewing how it looks like after you've made those changes. So I think 45 minutes is your minimum really for a decent one.
Okay, and do you have an average?
Minimum 45. Normally I book out 90 because also I want to give time for once. It's such a powerful tool as well with allowing the runner to see themselves running. So once you've done the assessment and you've talked about a few things and you've let them sit back and maybe raise some questions themselves and spot things, then you've got that precious window of opportunity I can say that Meekins isn't around.
We're in his office, but yeah, let's hope he hasn't heard that. But I think that's a fair use of window of opportunity.
There's a load of rock tape and Pilates posters.
There's needles everywhere. I know. We'll take some photos.
Yeah. But anyway, I like to make sure that even once the gait analysis is the actual practical side of it is over, then I want to act on it as soon as possible, so that it's fresh in the runner's mind about what we're going to change, why we're doing it, if it leads on to some particular exercises or drills. So yeah, when I first started out, I thought every single run that comes to this room I want to get on a treadmill, and I only really had kind of 5 or 10 minutes or something, and I don't do that anymore. If someone really wants, if I feel that the runner's form is important when I have a look at it, and I make sure they understand we're going to need longer than 10 minutes, we're going to book you out for a specific session to look at your gait.
So it's come up quite a bit, quite rightly so, about load management in terms of scheduling. So is there anything else you'd like to add into why that's become such an important part of managing running injuries?
I think like I touched on before, the fact that runners, for some reason along the way, believe that they can run every day, sign up for as many races as possible. I think this maybe the problem is that because it is, like Tom's mentioned, such a social thing. Once you're the runner, you've got the gear, you've got the shoes, you belong to the UK Run Chat and all that sort of stuff, which is great. It's massive support. Psychologically, it can often, as Tom mentioned, take you out of very dark places and give you meaning to life, and it's fantastic. These are all the positive sides of running, but then it's very easy to slip down that rabbit hole of overdoing it and overloading. And we know, research has shown, I can't remember the name of the author, but the one that came up, I think it was more of a study on impact, that in the majority, 50% of running related injuries, overtraining was behind it, or poor planning. And this is something which, as therapists, I think we can have the most success with working with runners, and where the boundaries sometimes, one of the things I talk and I enjoy is where the boundary of therapist stops and running coach starts. I think it's all got very blurred. And unless you work with a running coach, if they've got a running coach, you need to work with them. If you are a running coach yourself, then fantastic, because you're going to have knowledge in that field. But if you're really going to help a runner who's suffering from pain and injury, you need to help them plan not only their week, which normally most runners are experts at. Most runners have picked up on the idea they need to do some form of interval training, some hill training, and a long Sunday run. Fantastic. The problem they have is planning not just their microcycle, but their mesocycle and the macrocycle, and allowing them to actually, I get my runners to actually plan their year ahead, buy a big wall chart or something, or do it digitally, but make sure that you're not signing up for 3 marathons in a row unless you've got that history, you can manage it. Pick your races, get your goal A races, and then check that the other races you've booked in for are actually helping you towards your main race, because before you know it, you're trying to hammer out every park run to get a PB. You're then doing this 10k colour run or something, and then you've got the half marathon coming up. You're doing another marathon, and then you're doing the London. You've suddenly got the ballot result for that through, and it should be no surprise when you show runners how much they're doing. Surprise, surprise, you're getting an overload injury, and that's why you're here. And no matter how much I push and prod and poke and twist you around, I'm not going to solve this problem for you. It's something you've got to take control of.
Fantastic. Anything to add on that?
Yeah, I totally agree with Matt there, and I think we're constantly trying to find this balance between the loading habits of the runner and how much they can actually cope with. So this difference between loading habits and load capacity. I think there's quite a lot of research in it, but there's a good review in 2012 by Nielsen that found that it really isn't anything really clear that we can say. We can't say you should run X amount of miles per week. We can't really say things like that. But we've got perhaps some simple messages we can get out there to runners that will probably help keep them off our couches and keep them running. And the simplest one is, if you're going to change gradually, whether that's the volume of running you're doing, or the intensity, or the frequency, or the type. If you want to switch between different types of shoes, anything you want to change, you want to add in gradually. And as Matt said, planning is so useful. Having people actually think about how they're going to use their mileage over the next coming weeks and think about how they increase it. There's an often quoted 10% rule that is around the running community, and there isn't really any evidence to support it, but it's this idea that you take your total weekly mileage and you add a maximum of 10% to form the next week. So it just gives people a little bit of a ballpark figure as to how much they should be increasing. And it has its limitations. It's limited at the top end. If you're running 100 miles a week, you should perhaps adding a 10 mile or an extra 10 miles not be difficult, but it's also limited at the bottom end. If you're only running 2 or 3 miles a week, it's going to take you forever to reach any distance. But it gives us something that we can give people to try. Also thinking about, as Matt says, planning, stepping up and then stepping back. So the more modern training schedules will have a build-up for 3 or 4 weeks, and then a week where you drop back by perhaps 10 or 15% in your weekly mileage, you drop the intensity, and you let the body recover. And I think if you've got the opportunity with a running coach, ideally, that's the best thing. Then you can give people the chance to have quite a structured training program that will build up over time in a sensible way. It is difficult because the research isn't clear. As I said, there is evidence to show rapid increase in mileage does tend to result in injury. There is some evidence linking training intensity to certain injuries and training volume to certain injuries. So I think we also end up borrowing a little bit from the performance literature. So if Stephen Seiler's work, did a really good paper in 2010 looking at the split between low and high intensity work for endurance athletes. So they recommend for performance benefits you should be doing around 80% at low intensity and 20% at high intensity. So we've got some information there we can say change gradually, maybe use something like the 10% rule, maybe have a look at how you're structuring your week. So if you're an endurance athlete, the majority of your stuff is low intensity running. Having that combination of things hopefully means that we're keeping people from getting those training errors, which, as Matt said, some papers say 50%, some say 60 to 70% of training of injuries are due to training error. There's even some that suggest that 80% of our running injuries are down to training error. So we've got to help people to stop that.
Okay, and you've both mentioned strength and conditioning, and the particularly strength work came up earlier, but is there a place for more generic cross training in your routines? Do you push your non-triathletes towards the pools and the bikes and things, for example?
Yeah, definitely, without a doubt. And again, I'm not sure about the research, but it just makes perfect sense that if we're going to reduce, for example, impact, which is the main reason I think behind overload with regards to running-related injuries, you want to keep your fitness up, you want to keep things ticking over. There's no reason you can't do that through swimming or cycling and just reduce the impact load. And I think this is something where a lot of runners, they're still kind of tied in the idea that the more they run, the better they're going to run. And I know it's tricky because once upon a time, I've been to presentations by people like Mike Grattan, who used to talk about, he used to run with people that do 120 miles a week, and I don't know what's changed I suspect what's changed between then and now is a runner back then was a totally different monster of power and efficiency than the runners of today. But we can't keep using the principles of before. We can't keep telling recreational runners that the more you run, the better you're going to get, because they're just not strong enough. We're not dealing with the same human beings. It's probably different cultures, different societies, different eating habits, different nutrition, different sleeping patterns. So yeah, definitely cross-training and getting your strength work in. I mean, most runners I've got now, I try and get down to 3 days a week, to tell you the truth. I mean, if they're going to kind of your sub-3 marathons and are at that level, then fair enough, you're obviously going to increase it because I need to get that base volume in. And a lot of runners are horrified when I suggest 3 days a week. But but then again, this goes.
Runners love to run.
This is the thing, but I think it's a lot of it. It's like we've commented on today, the psychosocial side of it. Because when they're not running, they're like, "What am I?" They need to get up in the morning, not so much because they're feeling they're becoming better runners, because that sets up their whole day. They get to work, they've been out at 6 o'clock, they've done their run, and that's it. They're identified, they feel comfortable about themselves. So
they can tell everyone about it every hour of each day.
You haven't got time to your strength training, but you've got time to post all your latest Strava up on Facebook and stuff. But I think, again, treating runners, especially recreational, this is an important thing you need to address. With all sorts of runners, even if your alpha male walks in and you think, I don't want to go down in too much of a hippie routine with this guy, but if they're out training every day, are they doing it because they really believe that's going to help their running, or are they doing it because they wouldn't know what to do with their time if they weren't running? I think that's an important question to ask of them.
Absolutely.
Touches on beliefs again there, doesn't it, which is so important. Does a runner believe that they have to do high mileage in order to compete? Can we challenge that? But a couple of things that you've talked about there, Jack, with the strength and conditioning, hugely valuable. Big study, 2013, Laosin, although it didn't include many runners, it has to be said, found that you can reduce injuries by as much as 50% with a good strength and conditioning program. So we know it's useful, and there are more and more studies around runners showing that it can improve performance. Varying amounts, usually somewhere around the 3% improvement in performance over around about sort of 6 to 8 weeks, which is pretty good, and it gives us another way of selling it to our runners. So we know of all the things we have, one of the few things that will improve the runner's ability to handle load is your strength training. So trying to achieve that balance, it's going to be really valuable.
It's funny how many people challenge that paper. I think even you've been challenged on Twitter. Or they weren't running though; it was just sports related. But I mean, that's such a significant statistic. I think.
Yes. Lower than overuse injuries that we know have.
I mean, running is overuse injuries, the majority of them, unless you fall down. So for people to challenge that, it really, again, it's this belief system. People don't want to do strength training; they want to go out and run. I think it's a fantastic paper you've mentioned. I quote it all the time.
It's helping people to see that all those other things we've mentioned, foam rolling, stretching, yoga, Pilates, they all maybe have a role, but they are not going to change your ability to handle the load involved with running. Really, the majority of evidence suggests that lifting fairly heavy is likely to be doing that. Just another practical point on the cross training. I try to mirror cross training with what the person's trying to do in their running if possible. So if you want someone to perhaps do a bit of bike work, for example, and what they would have been doing on their run would be a short interval session, then do a short interval session on the bike. If they wanted to go out and do an endurance run, do an endurance ride. So you're trying to get the cardiovascular system worked in a similar way, even if the tissues aren't worked in the same way. You're trying to do similar length of time, similar intensity, so they get similar benefits from it.
Justify that neurologically, you could argue as well, is that's part of their cycle. It would be less change when you do phase that back in. That sounds great.
Psychologically too, they don't feel they've lost out so much.
Sure.
But the only downside is, if you were to stick me on a bike for 90 minutes, I would be in all sorts of pain.
I'm the same.
You have to be careful, and you have to think about how you're going to do that. Do you give them a mixture of stuff that they might do that 90-minute run, but cross-train with a bit of bike, bit of row, a bit of actual cross-train, a bit of swimming, whatever, but so you're not ending up swapping a running injury for a cycling one.
Absolutely, yeah.
Really valuable tool. If I'm writing plans, then exactly what you said, the rowing machine, I think people would never dream of getting on a rowing machine in a gym, but if you set them up that same kind of interval training, and you write down on the paper you're going to do kind of 2 minutes of this, then you have a little break, and then you're going to do 2 minutes again. If you give them that idea that they are kind of running, suddenly they come out, what a great workout, it was amazing, I've never would have rowed before. So yeah, it's a very good point by Tom. The other thing I just want to mention before I forget is with regards to the ancillary exercise and the strengthening. I think again, one thing, when you do get runners doing their strengthening, I don't know if it's a misconception or because it's easier, but we get this thing where 10-minute plank challenges, or they think because they're doing an endurance event and having to run 26.2 miles or something, that their weights need to be kind of 50, 100 reps with no weight at all. And this again is a misconception which I think as therapists we need to clear up. And like Tom mentioned, that okay, you're running 26.2, but the load and the force it takes to hop from one foot to the other 1,500 to 2,000 times a mile, to get that strength you're going to have to do heavy reps. And this is where we proposed kind of the 10 reps, or even the other day, I can't remember, it was a study that I tweeted out showing that even it was some gains, it was amongst, I think it was elite runners, but it was showing the benefits of 3 rep max, which I thought was a bit strong. I wouldn't give that to a recreational runner because I'd worry them hurt themselves, but it just showed the developments they made from I think it was a 6 or something week program of doing 3 rep max basic lifts, and the effect on their running performance was huge. So yeah, getting runners to move in the idea that they have to reach failure. And female runners, I think it's worth mentioning, without generalising, I think a lot of female runners who potentially, not all of them, but potentially they've got their range of movement and flexibility sorted. They're the ones who maybe have deficits in strength just because of, generalising, but nature. Often they're the ones who are a bit worried about going to maximum and going to fatigue and doing a 10 rep max or something because they worry they're going to turn out bulky and big and all Schwarzenegger sort of stuff. So that's a big educating thing as well. They're the female runners, the very ones who need to be down the gym, lifting the steel and actually taking it to 10 reps to fatigue so that they get the benefits from it, rather than trying to do 10-minute planks, or things like that.
Yeah. Oh, great stuff. And so I'm happy and comfortable if you guys want to sit on the fence on this one, but I want to try and do a bit of which would you value higher? The overall training load stuff that we've talked about in terms of capacity, and then more specific biomechanical principles of, say, internal moments at the knee, for example. So obviously I agree it's going to be a bit of both, but which do you see as being the priority when it comes to running overuse injuries?
I think probably it varies quite a lot between individuals. So for some people, you might actually find they come in and they see you and they haven't really changed their load profile, they haven't really changed their training a great deal, and yet things have started to hurt, and you wonder, well, we haven't really got much evidence of training error here. We haven't really got that. So perhaps there is something more biomechanically that is different or that has changed. And for other runners, and I'd say this is probably the majority of the runners, it is more that they have changed something in their training. So I think most people, it probably is how much you run, how hard you run, how frequently you run, more than exactly how you run, or whether you're a little bit tight somewhere, or a little bit stiff somewhere. We're going to see a huge amount of variety in that side of things. So I think probably for most people, it is the overall training the things that you're doing rather than the individual characteristics. But one little point with that is, in theory, if you have always run in that way, if you've loaded those tissues in that way, they should be able to adapt to them. So when that's part of the reason why I think we see a lot of variety out there, because people can adapt to their running style. It's probably a style they've had for many, many years. They can adapt to it as long as there isn't a rapid change. And I think that's probably where the problems often come in. So I'm leaning that side of the fence just about, I would say.
Okay. And Matt?
I'm a bit mildly disappointed. I thought you were going to... Well, after your sort of discussion with Greg on Twitter about the biomechanical side of things, I thought you would have been plumping up for that a bit more. Well, I agree with you. I think I try and, as much as possible, understand everything I can understand about each side of it. And I think with that particular discussion with Greg, we were looking at a specific factor as a risk factor in patellofemoral pain, and I think that particular one was hip adduction. There is a reasonable amount of evidence that seems to link excessive hip adduction during running with patellofemoral pain, and that if you change that, if you improve it, like in the studies by Neuron and Willie, you do seem to get improvement in symptoms. So I think there are, as I said, individual variations, and we can certainly justify our biomechanical changes, but I do also think there's a lot to be said for saying, well, would we perhaps with this runner maybe lean towards more of changing the training error side of things? And I tend to do both. I would tend to say, okay, you've come into me with patellofemoral pain, I can see you've got excessive hip adduction, but I can also see that you increased your mileage by 50% a week. So I can see there's both sides of it. So let's get in there and adjust your running down to a comfortable level and talk to you about how you go forward and not progress so quickly. But let's also see perhaps if we can improve your running kinematics a little bit and your running kinetics a little bit with some strength work. So then you think you're covering all bases really. Okay. I just realised I just sounded a bit like you then. I was actually a bit confrontational and challenging Tom. I didn't mean to do that. I'll put you on the spot.
Well, I'm out of a job. I don't know why I still stayed in the room, but...
Physio Matters Podcast? No, but that's brilliant.
And that's... Telehammer down.
But no, that's just a classic example of Tom Goom running physio being one of the best balanced physiotherapists out there that I know. And if I'm not available in Brighton, then I'd very much recommend him. But no, it's really refreshing to hear, because there is the biomechanical side of things which we can look down. But I totally agree that in the majority of cases, especially the recreational runners, which I don't know about Tom, but probably 90% of mine are recreational runners. It is, if you look deeply at their training load and stuff, there's so much you can do before you start getting bogged down with, oh, look how this is rotating, look how this is turning. And also the other point that I make is, as soon as we're kind of avoiding this idea of making the runner feel that they've got something wrong with them. So there's always this danger of, as soon as you start pointing out, making a runner do a single leg squat, and if you start saying, oh, look how your knees twisting in there, what do you mean? Now, two things are going to happen. Either they're going to start catastrophizing about it and maybe increase or delay the recovery and increase the pain they're feeling or something, or secondly, they're just going to hand themselves even more over to you because they believe that you'll be... Oh, we've just been...
oh, no. We've been radio bombed by Greg Lehman. Yeah? Live. I don't know about live. I don't know if you'll make the cut, but we were just bad-mouthing you, actually. So
people like Greg Lehman just sit on the fence, like we were saying, never saying what they feel.
That's true. That's the right way to be sometimes.
How's things going in there without us, Greg?
It's slowed down.
I bet.
Well, you're not there now. What are they doing?
I just put the slides up and let them read it. There's like a ball that goes over the words, and you just follow along and read it. It just passes to the next person.
Yeah, all your protocols and stuff, yeah?
Oh, the protocols, yeah, because now it's just the fascial release part.
Good. Nice one.
Foam rolling later.
But we'll be back in to carry your course later, and we won't be long now, mate.
We've been radio bombed by Greg Lehman. So if you do draw too much attention, even if you're just assessing, I think it's important to keep it to yourself, because you could either get them catastrophizing about something they haven't even noticed before, and also there's this danger that they're going to think, oh wow, I'm broken, now you can fix me. And it might be a great way for having to come in for every week for the next 8 weeks or something to try and sort out that rotation. But the evidence does suggest that it's not a good way. As soon as they see you as the operator, then that can very much delay recovery. Yeah.
We've got to have the right communication, exactly, I think, and if you can try and be positive and just I talk about fine-tuning and tweaks. I say
rather than overhauls or flaws.
Overhauls, and sometimes I show them videos of me running, and they see that I'm not great.
And when they've stopped laughing,
and they go, "Can you really run on those legs? They're so skinny." But yeah, so you help them to see that nobody runs like the textbook, and their running is a variation of normal, but give them some options. I think I personally don't tend to go down the route of saying you must run in this new style that I've suggested all the time. I think it's about saying, well, we know variety is good, variability is a good thing to have, so let's give you options. If you're feeling a bit tired or a bit tight or a bit painful, maybe you try, for example, increasing your step rate, see if it affects that knee pain, see if it makes you feel a bit more comfortable. But not saying you're going to run like this all the time, and not, as you rightly saying, that leading to catastrophization, with really dark and gloomy words. I've heard people being told, "Oh, you shouldn't run," and I really don't agree with that. I think we want to be encouraging and just fine-tuning, and not, as Matt says, promoting people to become fearful and worried.
Absolutely. When there's not that overt training error, or which, as we're saying, with sometimes that there is some overload that can be teased out of people's stories, and we're looking down the more particulars. There is an argument that it's those particulars or more particulars that start to justify our professional role and start to make it a more of a specialised gambit. So when it comes to the fact that we've identified that change is often the biggest screening thing that we look for, and I think you guys are agreeing on that, then is it not fair to say that some of those intervention studies that are showing biomechanical change, could it just be the change itself rather than the force parameters that could be making those differences, both in tissue physiology, but also the neurology that drives their symptoms?
Yeah, totally. We don't necessarily know exactly how most of our things work. Mechanism of action for virtually everything we do can be debated. We also don't have, with those studies yet, any long-term studies. So we don't know if that change has any negative consequences further down the line. But I think we've always got to be mindful of the effects that change have, both positive and negative. And there is a little bit of evidence to show that if we make large changes to people's running styles, it makes them less efficient and reduces their running economy. So we might be happy we've altered their loading, but we may have made them slower, at least in the short term. So we have to be really mindful of the pros and cons of what we're doing. How it works, if it works.
We tell them to change things slowly. We can't be hypocrites, can we? So no, it makes a lot of sense.
But that's where, again, if you can take from the research, because there are ways of making small changes, like your step rate. The research has found that as little as a 5% increase in step rate can reduce load at the hip and the knee. So we're looking at a small change, not used permanently throughout their running. And so we aren't looking at maybe saying, oh, you need to go 4 foot, which is a really big change. If you're a heel striker, to go to the 4 foot, it's going to change your loading completely, affect your calf and your foot and all sorts of things and lead to problems. We're making little changes. But again, the more we know about it, the more we understand it. And we need to see running as well as a very fluid, changeable thing. We can't look at someone running one speed on a treadmill in one state of fatigue or non-fatigue and say that's how you always run, because when we get faster we change our step rate, we change our stride length. When we're fatigued, things change. On different surfaces things change.
When we're angry, when we have different music in, it can vary, can't it?
So we can't really sort of sit there in a position to say, well, you should run like this all the time, because it's such a changeable feat. So we've just got to try and help make that change useful for the patient if we can.
Okay, anything to add on that, Matt?
No, I think it's very true, and it's something which, as people doing gait analysis, you have to take into consideration. If anything, I'd like to have the opportunity to take people out more and look at them running outside, but we've got a very expensive gait lab that needs to be paying back, so I tend to keep them in there. But no, it's very true. Playing around with people with different fatigue level and different speeds, and then of course we haven't touched on different footwear as well, and I don't think we should.
One thing on the gait stuff that, again, it's another avenue that perhaps we haven't studied as much, but is the effect of the environment on how we run. I was treating a runner the other week who had iliotibial band symptoms, and he'd gone and done an ultramarathon, and he said the majority of it was on really narrow trails, and those of us that do trail running know that you get squidged into almost like tractor tyre imprints that make you run pretty much one foot in front of the other. And we know from some of the studies that narrow stride width increases ITB load. So we're looking at a situation where his running environment has affected his stride width. That's increased the load, and that's caused the issue. So it's another sort of thing to throw into the mix.
Absolutely, and good luck trying to extrapolate that with a very specific evidence base without logic and common sense, because his training parameters won't have been single track running unless he anticipated that.
Exactly, and perhaps we might say to him, if you're going to do that event again next year, that you want to do some stuff out on the trails and you want to gradually build yourself up in doing that, expose that tissue to that load gradually over a bit more time.
Absolutely, no, it makes sense. Well, thanks a lot, of course, today for coming on, guys, and I'm looking forward to getting this out there. Is there anything else that you'd like to plug specifically, or anyone that you'd love to name drop that hasn't come up already? Starting with you, Matt.
I'm not going to plug anything I do, because that's not what this is all about, is it? I'll plug Tom Goom, because it's been a pleasure being able to have a chance to sit down and chat with Tom. We do have quite busy lives. We've both got little kids now, so the chances of either hooking up, I think our wives are more likely to hook up than, I know my wife's hooked up with your wife, which is lovely. But it's nice. Thank you, Jack, for giving us an opportunity to sit down and talk.
Absolute pleasure.
And likewise, would say, guys out there, get reading Matt's stuff. He writes for Running Fitness and Runners Connect as well, and lots of different things. He's got lots of stuff out there that's definitely well worth the read. And then just, I am going to shamelessly plug one thing, which is
I might want to as well.
Which is, I do have 3 of my running repairs courses coming up. So we've got one in August, right here where we're sat at the moment in Spire Bushy. One in September in Dorset, and one in October in Haslemere. So have a look at those details on my site if you'd like to book on.
Brilliant. Yeah, we'll make sure we give some links to those, and also a lot of the literature that we've come to discuss today we'll pop onto the show notes newsletter that will go out to our subscribers. So again, thanks a lot. And that's session 19. Believe it or not, that was a condensed version of our chat that day. Those boys can certainly talk running. Both Matt and Tom are hugely generous with their time and resources online, so find @SportInjuryMatt and @Tom Goom, aka The Running Physio, on Twitter and Facebook. I certainly hope I'm not close-minded in my approach to learning, but I do hold some strong opinions that have built strength through careful scrutiny and consideration. Yet Matt and Tom have both changed and influenced my opinions, practice and outcomes in very positive ways in recent years. So I thank them personally for that, and hope that you enjoyed session 19 as much as I did recording it. Find me on Twitter. I'm @choose_health. The podcast team, headed by Jack March, tweets from @TPM Podcast. And we're now on Facebook, led by Rob Tyre as the Physio Matters Podcast. And here's the long-lost guest outro. Bye from me.
You've been listening to the Physio Matters Podcast.
Discussing physio matters, because physio
and sports therapy matters.